Kirk Cousins is off to a fast start in training camp. Is it going to translate to the regular season?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, these sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Iron that Sharpens the Iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Falcons for a lifetime, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers that make it your first watch, your first listen each and every day. All you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are giving you an update over the last 3 days of practice and, some decent days of practice. And the main takeaway will be about Kirk Cousins, and that'll be the bulk of today's conversation. But later we'll revisit, some of the 5 key position battles and the other couple of tidbits that sort of stood out to me over the last couple of days in terms of where position battles are trending. But, Sunday, as I'm recording this, was another sort of walkthrough day. This is kind of part of the Falcons ramp-up period in the early part of training camp. I think that second block that's going to begin on Tuesday, the Falcons are off Monday, will get a little bit more consistent play. That's the first time we might potentially during that block have their first padded practices. We'll see if Raheem wants to break out the pads. And then we'll have that third block the week after. That's going to include the joint practices against Miami. So those are going to be probably more critical blocks moving forward. But, the main takeaway to me from the first block is, how effective Kirk Cousins was. Very few incompletions in Friday and Saturday when they had full sort of practice days. And it's good to see Kirk getting off to that fast start. I was talking about this with the Locked On Falcons insiders. It's, certainly Captain Obvious, but, it's better than a slow start, especially since we're not going to see Kirk in the preseason. We probably won't see really any of the Falcons offensive starters during the preseason. And, you want to see them get off to the fast start since you won't be able to sort of reaffirm that in the preseason. And, we'll certainly explore this topic a little bit further as we approach the preseason. But you may recall, if you listened to this pod 3 years ago, I was very critical of Arthur Smith's decision to not play starters during that preseason outside of like 4 snaps in one game. I won't be as critical this year if Raheem Morris doesn't play the starters. The McVay disciples typically don't play their guys in the preseason. And again, we'll explore this further in it. But in a nutshell, I do think, my personal opinion is, I do think there are benefits of playing guys in the preseason, but you got to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis, per team, per player. And for the Falcons this year, I think the injury risk probably outweighs whatever those benefits are to playing guys in the preseason, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And so, to me, the big question about the Falcons this year is going to be whether or not they can get off to a fast start, right? Because that's arguably the toughest part of their schedule, is the first 5 games. And there certainly is a dark timeline, the darkest timeline, some might say, where the Falcons get off to an 0-5 start. That's certainly a possibility. We hope it's not true, but it's a possibility if the Falcons do not get off to as good a start. They're going to have to play good football in order to win games early in the season, is the point I'm trying to make. They just can't just be okay and win games, is basically what I'm saying. And you feel much better about the ability of them to play good football if Kirk Cousins is looking sharp early on in practice. And especially that matters because we know Kirk has a tendency to start slow in September. Now, Kirk isn't terrible in September when you look at the numbers or anything like that, but this has been a sort of consistent pattern across his NFL career. And then depending on what metrics you look at, like some metrics, he's above average in September. Other metrics, he's below average. It just kind of balances out to you're probably getting closer to average quarterback play in the month of September. the 15th best quarterback as opposed to the 10th best quarterback or 8th best quarterback, what we're hoping Kirk to be. But, this has been a trend over, 9-ish seasons as a starter that you're going to get better play from him in October and November than you get in September. And, we make a big deal about this because you have two tough matchups in September, arguably the two toughest matchups against Philadelphia and Kansas City. And they're both primetime games. And there's also that narrative about Kirk not being great in primetime games. And, that depending on what numbers you look at, he's 4-4 the last 4 years. He was 6-10 prior to that. But on Monday Night Football, the Eagles game is a Monday Night Football game. Career-wise, he's 2-9 in terms of Monday Night Football as a starter. And he's had some really rough performances, including one 2 years ago against the Eagles on Monday Night Football. So that's why, we worry about this moving forward. And it's going to just be a question of, does this fast start that the Falcons are having in training camp, does that carry over into the regular season? Now, I personally think if the Falcons are going to get off to a fast start in the regular season, it's going to depend on other factors, other variables, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. But it is at least good to see him in the offense getting off to this fast start. Now, the flip side of that, you could argue, with the offense looking as sharp as it has, what about the defense? And defense, seemingly, by all accounts, has been less impressive these first couple of days of training camp. Now, to that, I kind of say, who cares? We already knew the defense wasn't going to be very good this year, right? To me, the question is, on that spectrum of 18th best defense or 28th best defense, where do they fall on that spectrum? Now, if you ask me, I tend to think it's probably going to be closer to 28 than it is 18. That's just my personal opinion. But, you know me, I'm Mr. Drew, that negative Nancy or whatever. And again, the big reason for that is I just don't believe in this pass rush at this point in time. And so I definitely have to see it before I believe it. So we'll see. Now, you may think differently when it comes to this defense, and that's fine, right? Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I just want to know where you work so I can, make an anonymous tip to your boss to say, hey, maybe we should have a random drug test if you actually believe that the Falcons are going to have a good defense this year. If you're pushing the Falcons defense is going to be good this year, that agenda, and I know you're saying Aaron, don't snitch on me, but I'm just sitting here going I think you need to be locked up. That's him over there, officer. You know what I'm saying? That's what I need. I can't trust you out there in these streets on these wild drugs if you're out here saying the Falcons defense is going to be good this year. So we will see on that front. But, let's discuss some of the challenges that Kirk Cousins and this offense are going to need to overcome early in the season when we get to see them in September, if they're going to get off to that much needed fast start. And to me, it's less really about Kirk Cousins and really about the 10 players and the one coach around him. We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, summertime is great for a lot of things, but the sports aren't always sporting like we want them to. Again, baseball's still going strong, but, we're in the dead time of the NFL and NFL, although NFL's ramping up. We got Olympics going on, and that's where FanDuel can come in. They can help, keep the party going all summer long, whether you're looking at the Olympics, whether you're looking at, Major League Baseball, the upcoming NFL season, right? FanDuel's going to hook up all their customers all summer long with a daily boost or bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just head over to FanDuel.com and you can make the most out of your summer. If you want to bet on the upcoming Falcons season, you want to bet on, their over under win totals, whether they're not, they can win some of these games in September, their Super Bowl odds, Kirk Cousins MVP odds, Kirk Cousins yards, touchdowns he's going to throw. Again, get in on that action before the buzz starts to build and those lines start to change for Kirk Cousins. So all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com to make the most out of that. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So before we get into my concerns about what Kirk is going to face and the challenges him and his offense are going to have to overcome in the regular season, some of this stems from, me watching a lot of film of the Vikings offense this last week. And I have a video for the Locked On Falcons insiders that will break down some of those things that I'm going to see. So some of the things that we're going to talk about on this episode right now are going to be things that you will be able to get to see visual, plays to represent what I'm talking about on this podcast. So if that's interesting to you, hey, why not become a Locked On Falcons insider by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/lockedonfalcons. You get a 14-day free trial so you can try it. Check out this one video about the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, for free. And then, after a 14-day free trial, if you want to keep it, you like it, hey, you can pay $4.99 a month After that, you also will get access to extended all 22 reviews when the season starts. You get access to all the film breakdowns of all the Falcons draft picks and all the other film breakdowns. I did a breakdown of the Rams offense, talking a lot about what Zach Robinson may bring to the table as a play caller. And we'll talk more about Zach Robinson on today's episode. So again, all that's there for you as a Locked On Falcons insider. You also get priority on Q&A. So check out that link in the description below if you're interested in that. But the main two concerns I have with Kirk Cousins at this point in time in his career is his arm strength and mobility. Now, I don't think the arm strength is a major issue, but as we talk about Kirk being potentially on the decline at age 36 and beyond over the next couple of years, it's going to be a lot of that's going to be tied to the arm strength. Now, he has the arm to make all the throws. It's just a question of, can you make all the throws well, right? And that's, to me, manifests itself often where, or not often, but enough where Kirk is trying to attack outside the numbers, where it's like, this is not great. And so as we move forward, especially when we get into the future, we're talking about the potential ways that Michael Penix could potentially upgrade this offense. It may be, being able to attack, outside the numbers. The question with Penix is, can he be as effective inside the numbers? And that's really where Kirk really shines. Like, this offense is going to shine really well in terms of attacking the middle field. And that's some of the things that I will show in that Locked On Falcons Insider if you want to check that out. But the thing with Kirk Cousins, and this has always been the knock on Kirk Cousins and the knock on a lot of quarterbacks in this league that aren't, the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And it's the idea that they're not going to be able to carry an offense, right? It's the whole truck versus trailer debate that I'm sure you've heard at various points talking about the quarterback position, where a truck is a guy that can kind of carry the load, and a trailer is kind of the load that needs to be carried, and that's really about the supporting cast around him, enhancing his ability. And Kirk has always been a trailer, a very good trailer, a very expensive trailer, but still a trailer nonetheless, where it's really about the supporting cast. And this was a similar conversation that we had about Matt Ryan, right? Now, I thought Matt Ryan, and this term is sounds like a knock on him, but I don't mean it as a knock. Like, I think Matt Ryan was kind of the ultimate game manager, and I think Kirk is in a similar sort of category as that, as a guy that can really do a great job managing the game. You just got to put the right supporting cast around him. And, that applies to Matt Ryan, that applies to Kirk Cousins. And it's why, those former Falcon teams invested so much resources in their offense and neglected other positions. And you've seen similar things with, Minnesota over the years with that and whatnot. So, I think one of the key ways that, it's all about the supporting cast is because the quarterback, and whether we're talking about Matt Ryan, whether we're talking about Kirk Cousins now, is they're not going to be doing a whole lot off structure, right? That, and that's my second main concern with Kirk Cousins, right? It's the lack of mobility, the inability to create off structure when things go wrong. When that initial read isn't there, what are you doing when you have to extend plays and do and escape pressure and all that sort of stuff? And that, is a main concern with Kirk prior to his injury, but even becomes a bigger concern coming off his Achilles injury. He arguably already was the least mobile quarterback in the NFL before his injury. And so, like, that's not going to get better, now that he's a year older coming off of this injury. And so when we imagine that sort of darkest timeline, right, where things go very wrong for this Falcons team this season, and especially early in the season, like, to me, the one sort of red flag with Kirk Cousins is, that inability to create off structure. That if the supporting cast isn't carrying, the burden, I guess you could say, around him, then you could see that create problems for Kirk with him not being able to evade pressure and all these various things. And just a hint of pressure is going to cause this offense to sort of collapse and whatnot. And so that, to me, is the main concern with Kirk Cousins moving forward. But that gets us into the conversation about how do you mitigate that by building up the structure around them. And to me, there's three main things with that. But, like, you need to have that strong supporting cast. And again, that's part of the root of my skepticism about the Falcons in general, is I don't necessarily, believe that the supporting cast is as strong as some people think it is. Like I know the narrative is like the supporting cast was great. It's just the coach and the quarterback failed us last year. And while the coach and the quarterback did absolutely fail, I think the supporting cast also, failed as well when it came to the on offense, not the defense. The defense might fail us this year, but it didn't fail us last year. But, like, to me, with the run game, the weapons, the offensive line were not nearly as good as they were billed to be going into last season. And to me, the Falcons kind of did the bare minimum. That's the root of my negativity, but that's not what today's episode is about. We're talking about the three things that can, enhance Kirk and allow him to be that ultimate game manager to maximize the sort of infrastructure that is around him. And the first thing is the play call, right? That's the literal structure or design of the play, right? And Zach Robinson is an unknown in that, but we feel optimistic that he's going to be a very effective play caller. The question really is about him being either a great play caller, a good play caller, or a meh play caller, right? We're not even factoring in the possibility of him being a bad play caller. That's just not even on the table. But, we've had a lot of meh play callers the last couple of years, over the last decade, right? Whether we're talking about Arthur Smith, whether we're talking about Dirk Cutter, whether we're talking about Steve Sarkisian. And we need Zach Robinson to be more than that, right? We need him to be good, hopefully great. And that's why you've heard me talk many times this offseason where, to me, this offseason was less about the upgrade at quarterback. It's really about the potential upgrade in terms of the play caller at the offensive coordinator's position. And basically it's the idea of like, you don't have to worry about Kirk Cousins, you're not being great off structure if the initial structure of the play goes well and everything goes according to plan. But in order for that to go to plan, you need players to execute. And that gets us to the second thing when it comes to the structure of the play. And that's about the weapons, right? We're focusing on the skilled players at running back, wide receiver, tight end. And again, I think we have more than enough talent to be able to make whatever Zach Robinson's schemes are and designs are work, right? Now, I don't think the Falcons' talent level is like elite as some people hype it up to be, but it's good, right? By NFL standards, a lot of teams have similar talent to us, but they have more than enough talent to be able to be an effective offense and be one of the better offenses in the NFL, spearheaded by Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. And talking about Bijan Robinson, he's a player that, especially when we talk about sort of the structure around him, he may be a key part of that because Kirk doesn't have the play extension ability with his legs. A lot of those times that other quarterbacks might decide to break out of the pocket and extend plays, Kirk is just going to need to check the ball down in those situations. And that's where you need Bijan to kind of step up. I saw a stat earlier this summer called plus minus. That's basically your catch rate based off of the distance the ball is thrown. And Bijan was dead last in the NFL in terms of that for running backs. And so basically just needs to be more effective catching the football, being that more reliable, target, especially if we get into these plays and the design breaks down and Kirk needs to check the ball down. You need to be that reliable outlet, security blanket. And also one thing that would help with Bijan is being that sort of dude, that playmaker that can turn a 4-yard check down into a 15 or 20-yard gain. And that's when we talk about talent, that I think that's one of the key ways that you can measure talent is basically taking the mundane and making it spectacular is how we measure talent in the NFL. But that to me is something that is going to matter. Now, the third thing when it comes to the structure around Kirk Cousins is the offensive line, right? And again, we're worried about Kirk's mobility, and that's where pressure comes into play, right? And I think that's something, to me, of these three things, this is the one where it's the biggest concern for me, right? This is why you've heard me harp on the offensive line and the potential matchups they're going to face early in the season with some of these really good defensive lines. And right, it's not because the offensive line stinks. It's because the offensive line is good, but they're not as good as I think some people hype them up to be up to this point. They have not shown that yet. And they have a tendency to struggle against like star players, right? We have seen too many star players in recent memory just kind of own this offensive line and take over games, right? Brian Burns, Derek Brown last year in week 1, Aiden Hutchinson kind of in that week 3 game, Jeffrey Simmons, especially in that week 8 game against the Titans, right? This is why Cam Jordan was such a huge thorn in our side for so many years, because he had a tendency to just kind of take over games for 7 years, it seemed like it was, before he was washed. Oh, I'm sorry. I had something in my throat. But, this upcoming season, we have TJ Watt, Cam Hayward in week 1. We have Jalen Carter potentially in that tier in week 2. Chris Jones definitely in that tier in week 3. And if those guys are out here wreaking havoc in those early games in the ways that Brian Burns and Derek Brown and Cam Jordan have done in the past years, that could be a real problem for Kirk Cousins, given that limited mobility and that ability where pressure is going to lead to, again, Kirk is not going to, hopefully won't be taking a ton of sacks. That's a thing that Kirk has always done, but it's going to disrupt the ability for him to go out there and operate the offense in the ways that we need it to in order for this offense to be effective. And to me, the big question mark with the offensive line is really on the interior, especially with a quarterback like Kirk, because of the pocket style of play, the lack of mobility. That interior pressure is going to create more problems for Kirk Cousins than exterior pressure theoretically could or would or should. And that's why I continue to circle Matthew Bergeron as a big sort of X factor for this team, that the growth that he shows from year 1 to year 2 is going to be huge for this offense moving forward. So that is going to continue to be a conversation over the coming weeks. But again, it's good to see Kirk signing early in practice, but when we get to the games, right, we're not talking about practice, but when we get to the games, right, his ability to shine is going to matter a ton. And I think these 3 things, the play calling, the weapons executing the play calling, and then the offensive line holding up in protection, are going to be critical to the Falcons' ability to get off to a fast start in the regular season. And, I think part of the reason why Kirk is shining, because especially when it comes to the pressure aspect of it, like that's not really being challenged in the preseason, or I'm sorry, in training camp. So, especially going up against the Falcons defensive line. But hey, why am I taking cheap shots? I'm sorry, guys. But that's, not to sit here and say like, oh, it doesn't count because, Kirk is not whatever. It does count. But, the one, to me, the biggest question with Kirk, I don't think we're going to really get a definitive answer when it comes to how he handles the pressure, his ability to create off structure when the structure of the play breaks down. And then it inevitably does, right? The defenses, they get paid the big bucks too. Sometimes they do a good job on any given play. No one bats 1,000 when it comes to offensive execution and play design. So, we're not going to really know the answer when it comes to Kirk answering this big question until September 8th. And that's why, it's exciting to see the early returns being promising, but I'm not going to necessarily be like, hey, just because the early returns were promising in training camp and in the preseason, or not in Kirk's case in the preseason, but in training camp, means it's automatically going to be promising in the regular season, because the regular season is going to present very different challenges than what Kirk has to deal with on a daily basis in practice, because they're games and all that stuff. So, we'll have to wait and see when it comes into September to see how that plays out. But you don't have to wait till September to get, what are the biggest stories and trends in sports. Check out Locked On Sports Today, free 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of trends, we'll talk about 5 position battles and how things are trending at each one of those spots so far in camp as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, it is summertime. Baseball is king. The Braves season, going all right, right? There's been some ups and downs and whatnot, but, they'll figure it out by the time we get to October. But, as the Braves figure it out, and as, other sports teams in the local market figure it out, all you got to do to get back into the ballpark is head on over to GameTime. Great app, right? You can buy baseball tickets. You can shop their flash deals. Those are exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game where you can save lots of dollars. And of course, when you hit that purchase, you're not going to be slapped by hidden fees. You also get the seat views, that panoramic view from your seat. So, you're getting ahead of the curve in terms of GameTime is going to not sneak up things on you after you purchase, right? What you see is what you get with GameTime. And whether you're into sports, baseball, comedy, music, theater, whatever of it is near you, they're taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the GameTime app today. All you got to do is create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So there are 5 key position battles that we talked about at the very beginning of training camp that we'll see how they get settled over the course of training camp. That's slot receiver, outside cornerback, starting strong safety, weak side linebacker, and nose tackle, right? And let's talk about how those things are trending so far through the first couple of days, through this first block of practice. And there's clear trends at wide receiver where Ray-Ray McCloud seems to be well ahead of Rondale Moore at this point. Cornerback Mike Hughes has been getting the bulk, if not all of the first team snaps at that outside cornerback spot over someone like Clark Phillips. And then at strong safety, it has been primarily Richie Grant over DeMarco Helms. And I think of that group, McCloud being a significant gap, again, so far, between McCloud and Moore is probably the biggest surprise of the group. like you thought, or at least I thought going into this, Moore would be ahead and, they would be rotating potentially. But to me, what this, we'll see how it all plays out. But it does seem like Ray-Ray McCloud will be the team's primary slot receiver as of today, trending as where we're trending. But it's going to be interesting to see about Rondale Moore if he doesn't start making this more of a competition, because if he isn't the number 3 wide receiver, it potentially puts him on the roster bubble because he's not going to necessarily be a contributor on special teams on game days. Now, we'll see how it develops. I think that really more depends on, somebody else stepping up at that wide receiver position, someone like a Chris Blair or Josh Ali or Austin Mack or somebody like that stepping up before that's a real conversation later this summer, but it'll be worth keeping an eye on moving forward. Now, I know other people have sort of suggested that Mike Hughes potentially being the starter at outside cornerback is the biggest surprise. Again, those people aren't every day to this podcast. We've been talking about since May and June that like Mike Hughes was probably going to be the front runner at this position. And the main reason we talked about then was tackling. Tackling is going to matter a lot with how the Falcons want to play defensively with all the zone coverage they're going to do. Tackling is much more important than I think people realize when it comes to that. And Mike Hughes, at least in his NFL career, has proven that he's a semi-reliable tackler as an outside corner, while Clark Phillips has not. So we'll see how that trends, but it's probably going to, we'll see what happens with that. Now, weak side linebacker is interesting because it does seem like Nate Landman might be over Troy Anderson at this point in time. They've been kind of rotating in and out from all accounts and splitting those sort of first team reps. But to me, the thing that stood out that came out on Sunday was that Nate Landman has been wearing the green dot at various times, even when he's on the field with Caden Ellis, who wore the green dot last year for the Falcons. And the green dot refers to the person that has the device in their helmet that allows them to communicate with the coaches. Is basically the person that's calling the defense. They're basically the quarterback of the defense, right? And we mentioned earlier this offseason in the context of talking about Caden Ellis potentially playing outside linebacker, the question was, okay, if he's going to play outside linebacker, he's probably not going to wear the green dot. Who's going to wear the green dot? Would that be Nate Landman, right? And it made more sense for Nate Landman to be that guy than necessarily Troy Anderson, given Landman's experience over Troy Anderson. However, the question I had then was, if Nate Landman is going to wear the green dot, that means whoever wears the green dot is going to be on the field every snap, right? Just like the quarterback is on the field every single snap, calling defense. And you didn't necessarily want Nate Landman as an every down player because of his limitations in coverage. So we'll see how that plays out. But clearly the Falcons don't care about that. Is this a precaution so that they can have another option other than Caden Ellis? Or is there, a chance? But basically, to me, the fact that Nate Landman is wearing the green dot in practice is a big feather, in terms of my initial read of the situation. So when we talk about trends, it is trending definitely Nate Landman's direction based off of that fact alone. Now, nose tackle, haven't had really too much information leaking out of training camp. I've seen times where LaCale London's working with the third string. I've seen times where he's working with the first string, right? So I don't know what else to agree, but basically the main takeaway at nose tackle is Eddie Goldman's still practicing. So this might actually be a competition, and LaCale London won't win it purely by default at that position. So other spots that I think are of note aren't necessarily position battles that we circled at the beginning of camp, but it is noteworthy that James Smith-Williams has been getting the bulk of the first team reps at outside linebacker opposite Lorenzo Carter. I don't think that's a super huge surprise in the sense of, what James Smith-Williams and Lorenzo Carter bring to the table that other options that could start for the Falcons, namely Braylon Trice and Arnold Ebiketie, don't bring to the table is their ability as run defenders, right? And that has been sort of the commentary on James Smith-Williams being like a 260-pound edge. When people talk about the Michael Hoyt role, it's probably James Smith-Williams that you're thinking of more so than some of these other guys like Brandon Dorlus and Zach Harrison. But we'll see how that plays out this year. So that to me is of note that, it does seem like the Falcons have their base outside linebackers, two guys that can bring plus ability as run defenders there, and then potentially have their sub-package guys, which potentially, and so far through training camp, there's been a lot of notes on, Trice and Jarvis noted this when he was on the podcast Friday, that Trice and Arnold Ebiketie are getting those passing down reps as they should. So, but that was the big question with both of those players, Ebiketie and Trice, is how good are they against the run? And that may limit, their ability to be true blue starters because they may not be every down players because they are not a plus against the run. They are a minus against the run. And, anybody who knows anything about defense knows that, you want to limit how many minuses you have out there on the field. any given time because offenses will exploit it. Now, the last little position group worth talking about is it's noteworthy that we've heard that Storm Norton and Ryan Newsel are getting some first-team reps at both right tackle and left guard, respectively. And, I don't think that means anything that, Matthew Bergeron and Caleb McGarry are on the hot seat or anything may lose their starting spots. I just think it's a testament to those guys being the proven depth options for the team, which we've talked about, where there's, the 5 starters plus those 2 guys, Norton and Newsel, that are sort of the 7 that you are pretty comfortable with because they've actually played well on the football field. But the question we have is for that 8th offensive lineman that's going to be active on game days, particularly probably a guard, who's going to be that guy? And the fact is that no one has quite emerged to the Newsel Norton level, to me, is noteworthy in that regard. So that will be a topic of conversation over the next 6 or so weeks as we get geared up for, the regular season, who's going to win that 8th offensive line spot. So that is in store for you coming on the podcast in the future. We will have more for you tomorrow on the pod. Falcons are off Monday for practice, so that may lead to us doing a Falcons historian player shootout with Michael Vick. That is a possibility tomorrow if something else doesn't come up. So we'll see how that plays out. But make Locked On Falcons your first listen so that you don't miss that episode by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every